9 states experienced rolling blackouts last December when electricity demand exceeded available supply. Not during a once-in-a-generation ice storm, not during a catastrophic hurricane. During a cold snap that would have been completely manageable 10 years ago, the grid failed because there was not enough generation capacity to meet ordinary winter demand in 9 American states simultaneously, and that was December. In a few weeks, summer begins. And the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, the federal body whose sole purpose is to monitor the stability of the American power grid, has spent the past 4 consecutive years issuing warnings that each year are worse than the year before. Their Director of Reliability Assessment, John Mora, told reporters that in 30 years of doing this work, the current outlook is one of the grimmest pictures they have ever painted. NERC's 10-year summer peak demand forecast has grown by more than 50% within the last year alone. Summer demand is forecast to rise by more than 122 gigawatts over the next decade, adding 15.7% to current system peaks. And the planned retirement of 83 gigawatts of fossil fuel and nuclear generation over the same period means the grid is simultaneously losing the dispatchable power plants that can run 24 hours a day, regardless of weather, while gaining wind and solar resources that cannot. Mura said it plainly. Simply put, our infrastructure is not being built fast enough to keep up with the rising demand. And the reason I am telling you to buy a generator right now today, before the summer heat arrives, is that the demand surge that is about to hit the American grid this summer is arriving on top of an energy supply chain that has already been destabilized by the Iran war, a natural gas market that has already been disrupted by the Strait of Hormuz closure, and a grid infrastructure that has been chronically underinvested for decades. The blackouts that hit 9 states in December were a preview. The summer of 2026 is the full feature. And if you do not have backup power when the grid fails at 3 p.m. on a 107-degree afternoon in July, you will be sitting in a dark house with no air conditioning, no refrigeration, no well pump, if you are on a well, no medical equipment if you depend on it, and no timeline for when the power will come back. That is not a hypothetical. That is the scenario that NERC has been warning about for 4 consecutive years. And this is the year it is most likely to happen. NERC warned that more than half of North America faces blackout risk, and nobody listened. NERC's 2024 Long-Term Reliability Assessment, published in December and updated through June 2025, concluded that more than half of North America faces an elevated risk of energy shortfalls. PJM Interconnection, the grid operator that serves 65 million people across 13 states from New Jersey to Illinois, faces elevated risks beginning in 2026. That is this year. NERC's own words. Resource additions are not keeping up with generator retirements and demand growth. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, which covers a swath from Louisiana to Manitoba, including Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, faces what NERC classified as a high risk of energy shortfalls, with inadequate reserves. MISO's accelerated coal retirements, coupled with slower-than-anticipated resource additions, have created what NERC called a critical gap in the region's ability to maintain resource adequacy. As recently as the summer of 2023, MISO averted a shortfall only because 3,600 megawatts of coal retirements were delayed at the last minute. Without those delays, the lights would have gone out. In ERCOT, the Texas grid, explosive demand growth combined with increasing reliance on variable wind and solar resources creates what NERC described as elevated risk during summer evening hours when solar generation ramps down but demand remains high. That window, roughly 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. on the hottest days, is when Texas is most vulnerable to a catastrophic failure, like the one that nearly destroyed the grid during Winter Storm Uri in February 2021. When ERCOT came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of a total grid collapse that engineers said would have taken months to restore. The Southwest faces ongoing drought that threatens hydroelectric capacity. New England lost 1,400 megawatts of capacity when 2 natural gas generators at Mystic Station in Massachusetts retired. California continues to face public safety power shutoffs during wildfire season that can leave hundreds of thousands of homes without power for days. And in January 2026, NERC issued an additional warning that peak demand is forecast to rise 24% just from new data center loads. 24% from data centers alone. These are the facilities that power artificial intelligence, cloud computing, cryptocurrency mining, and the digital infrastructure that every major technology company in America is racing to build. And every one of those data centers draws power from the same grid that is supposed to keep your air conditioner running in July. The grid that NERC says is not being built fast enough. The grid that lost 9 states in December. The grid that came within 4 minutes of destroying itself in Texas. And what makes the 2026 summer different from every previous summer warning is the compound nature of the threat. In previous years, NERC's warnings were conditional. If extreme heat occurs, if generation outages exceed expectations, if drought reduces hydroelectric output, those were if-then scenarios with probabilities attached. In 2026, every single one of those conditions is either already present or virtually certain. The heat is coming. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's seasonal outlook for summer 2026 projects above normal temperatures across most of the continental United States. The generation retirements have already happened. The coal plants that retired in 2025 are not coming back. The data center loads that were in the planning stage 2 years ago are now drawing power from the grid in real time. And the natural gas supply that fuels 43% of American electricity generation has been disrupted by a war that nobody anticipated when NERC published its last assessment. Every assumption in the normal conditions scenario has been violated before summer has even begun. NERC's elevated risk classification is based on conditions that are already worse than what they modeled, which means the actual risk this summer is higher than what NERC has publicly stated. And John Mora, the man whose job it is to study these systems and issue warnings, said that extreme does not mean rare anymore. We know these conditions are not rare, he said. A Rice University professor who studies grid reliability described the situation more bluntly. It's sort of a roll of the dice that we might have serious problems this summer. A rough guess of a 1 in 6 chance, he said. And as the climate continues to warm, we'll keep loading the dice. Try all 1 in 6. Those are the odds of Russian roulette. And the consequences of losing are not abstract. They are 55 million people without power, as happened in the 2003 Northeast blackout. They are frozen pipes and burst water mains, as happened during Uri. They are hundreds of heat deaths, as happened during the 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome when temperatures exceeded 115 degrees in Portland, Oregon, and over 800 people died across the region. Data centers are devouring your electricity, and they get priority over your air conditioner. NERC's most recent long-term assessment concluded that new data centers for artificial intelligence and the digital economy account for most of the projected increase in North American electricity demand over the next 10 years. NERC's 10-year peak demand forecast increased by 69% from the prior year's projection, driven almost entirely by data center interconnection requests. A single large AI data center campus can consume as much electricity as a small city. Microsoft's planned data center complex in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, is designed to draw 1,000 megawatts at peak capacity. For reference, a megawatt powers roughly 750 homes. 1,000 megawatts powers 750,000 homes. One data center campus consuming the electricity of 750,000 households, and there are hundreds of these facilities planned, under construction, or operating across the United States right now. Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Oracle are engaged in the largest construction boom of electricity-consuming infrastructure since the Industrial Revolution. And the electricity they consume is not interruptible. Data centers run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, with contracts that guarantee priority access to the grid. When demand exceeds supply on a hot summer afternoon, the grid operator does not call Microsoft and ask them to turn off their servers. The grid operator calls your utility and asks them to implement rolling blackouts in residential neighborhoods. You are the variable in the equation. Your air conditioner is the load that gets shed. Your refrigerator is the appliance that loses power. Your home is the consumer of last resort, whose demand is sacrificed so that the data center's servers can continue training the AI model that will eventually be marketed back to you. Generator Source, one of the largest commercial generator dealers in the country, published a 2026 power grid vulnerability analysis that documented the dynamic explicitly. When regional baseline demand rises from data center loads, the grid has less buffer to absorb shock during extreme weather or mechanical failures. The margin of safety that used to exist between available capacity and peak demand has been consumed by loads that did not exist 5 years ago. And the households that are not connected to that digital economy, the households that just want their lights on and their food cold, are the households that will be disconnected first when the margin disappears. And the scale of data center construction underway right now is staggering. According to NERC's January 2026 assessment, data centers account for 90 gigawatts of the projected 160 gigawatt demand increase by 2030. To put 90 gigawatts in perspective, that is approximately equal to the entire generating capacity of France. American tech companies are building the electrical equivalent of an entire European nation's power system just to run AI models and cloud computing. and they are building it inside a grid that is already failing during ordinary weather events. Northern Virginia, the largest data center market in the world, hosts more than 300 data center facilities concentrated in Loudoun and Prince William counties. The local utility, Dominion Energy, has been struggling to keep up with interconnection requests and has warned that new data centers may face multi-year waits for grid connections. The strain on local transmission infrastructure is so severe that residential customers in surrounding communities are experiencing degraded reliability. Your lights are flickering because a data center down the road is training a language model. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has been fielding complaints from communities across the country that data center loads are degrading local grid reliability. But the economic incentives for data center development are enormous, and local governments are approving them faster than the grid can absorb them because the tax revenue and job creation are politically irresistible, even when the infrastructure consequences are dangerous. Natural gas prices have been destabilized by a war, and your power plant runs on natural gas. Here is the connection that almost nobody in the mainstream press is making for you. Approximately 43% of all electricity generated in the United States comes from natural gas-fired power plants. Natural gas is the single largest fuel source for the American electrical grid. When natural gas prices rise, electricity prices rise. When natural gas supply is disrupted, electricity supply is disrupted. And natural gas prices have been disrupted by the Iran war, the Strait of Hormuz closure, and the global energy supply shock that the IEA called the greatest in history. The Strait of Hormuz does not just transport oil, it transports a significant portion of the world's liquefied natural gas. Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter, depends on the strait for virtually all of its gas shipments. When the strait was closed on February 28, global LNG markets seized. European and Asian buyers scrambled for alternative supply, and that scramble pulled American natural gas exports higher, tightening domestic supply at the exact moment that the summer cooling season is approaching. NERC has specifically warned about the interconnected nature of the power and gas sectors, noting that limited pipeline capacity, competition with residential heating demand, and production disruptions can lead to fuel shortages for generators. During Winter Storm Uri in 2021, natural gas wellheads froze, pipelines lost pressure, and gas-fired power plants across Texas could not get fuel. The plants were operational, the fuel was not available, and the grid collapsed. The summer version of that scenario is not a freeze, it is a price spike. When natural gas prices surge because of war-driven LNG competition, the cost of generating electricity at every gas-fired plant in America rises simultaneously. Utilities pass that cost to consumers through fuel adjustment clauses on your electricity bill. And in the extreme case, when prices spike high enough, some generators may curtail output because the cost of fuel exceeds the price they can charge for electricity, which reduces available capacity at the exact moment demand is highest. Bloomberg reported that natural gas prices have risen more than twice as fast as wages over the past year. Your electricity bill has been climbing for months. And the summer of 2026 will accelerate that climb, because the war that closed the Strait of Hormuz did not just raise the price of gasoline, it raised the price of the fuel that generates 43% of your electricity. And the timing could not be worse. The summer cooling season is when natural gas demand for electricity generation peaks, because air conditioning is the single largest driver of summer electrical load. The Department of Energy estimates that air conditioning accounts for approximately 6% of all electricity produced in the United States, and during summer peak hours, that percentage can exceed 30% in southern states. All of that air conditioning demand ultimately draws on natural gas generation, which means the war-driven price increase hits the grid at the exact moment the grid is under maximum stress. And the utilities that operate gas-fired plants are facing a second cost pressure from the same war. The diesel fuel that powers the maintenance vehicles, the backup generators at substations, the emergency crews that repair downed lines, has also surged in price. Diesel is above $4 per gallon nationally and approaching $5 in some coastal markets. Every aspect of grid maintenance, repair, and emergency response is more expensive than it was 4 months ago. And utility budgets that were set before the war began are now insufficient to cover the operational costs of keeping the grid running through a summer that NERC says will be one of the most challenging in decades. Some utilities will defer maintenance to manage costs. Deferred maintenance is how a manageable stress becomes an unmanageable failure. A transformer that should have been serviced in May fails in July. A transmission line that should have been upgraded remains at capacity. A substation that was operating at 90% load hits 100% on the hottest day and trips offline, cascading the failure to the next substation in the circuit. That cascade is how a local equipment failure becomes a regional blackout. And the probability of that cascade has increased because the war made everything that prevents it more expensive. 122,000 megawatts of dispatchable generation are being retired, and nothing equivalent is replacing them. NERC's 2024 long-term reliability assessment documented that 122,000 megawatts of dispatchable generation, coal, natural gas, and nuclear plants that can run on demand regardless of weather are scheduled to retire over the next decade. That is roughly 10% of the entire installed generating capacity of the United States. And the resources replacing them are overwhelmingly wind, solar, and battery storage, which NERC described as inverter-based and weather-dependent resources that increase the complexity of planning and operating a reliable grid. Wind does not generate electricity when the wind is not blowing. Solar does not generate electricity at night or when cloud cover is heavy. And battery storage, while growing rapidly, provides hours of backup, not days. On the hottest day of summer, when the temperature hits 110 degrees in Phoenix and 105 in Dallas and 100 in Chicago, the demand for electricity peaks between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. Solar output begins declining at 4 p.m. Wind output in many regions is at its lowest during summer heat waves because the atmospheric conditions that produce extreme heat often produce calm, stagnant air. Battery storage can cover the gap for 2 to 4 hours. And then the dispatchable plants, the coal and gas and nuclear plants that can run through the night, have to carry the entire load until solar comes back the next morning. Except that 122,000 megawatts of those plants are being retired. And the blackouts that occurred in 9 states last December happened precisely because this transition is not being managed at the pace that reality demands. Utilities have already reversed or delayed the retirement of 16,000 megawatts of coal capacity since 2022 because the grid cannot afford to lose them yet. NERC's own recommendation, stated more bluntly than anything the agency has ever published, was that regulatory and policy-setting organizations must use their full suite of tools to manage the pace of retirements and ensure that replacement infrastructure can be developed and placed in service. That sentence is a regulatory agency telling policymakers that the retirements are happening too fast and the replacements are not ready. And the summer of 2026 is the summer where the gap between what was retired and what was built becomes physically visible as rolling blackouts in American cities. And there is one more dimension to the replacement problem that most Americans have never heard about. The electronic devices that connect wind and solar farms to the grid, called power inverters, have been causing dangerous system disturbances. NERC documented multiple incidents in Texas and California where solar farms suddenly and unexpectedly disconnected from the grid during disturbances, compounding the stress instead of helping relieve it. Mora called these inverter failures one of the most dangerous things to happen on the bulk power system, because grid operators are caught by surprise when renewable resources that are supposed to be online suddenly disappear. When a solar farm disconnects without warning during a heat wave, the grid operator must instantly find replacement power from somewhere else. If there is no replacement available because the dispatchable plants have been retired, the operator has one option: shed residential load, cut power to neighborhoods. Rolling blackouts. The wind and solar resources that are replacing the retired coal and gas plants are not just weather dependent. They are, in some configurations, actively destabilizing the grid during the exact conditions when stability matters most. What actually happens inside your house when the power goes out for 72 hours in 107-degree heat? Most Americans have experienced a power outage lasting a few hours. A thunderstorm knocks out a transformer. The utility dispatches a crew. Power is restored by morning. That experience has created a false sense of what a grid failure actually looks like. A grid failure is not a local outage caused by a fallen tree. A grid failure is a regional event where the available generation capacity is insufficient to meet demand, and the grid operator orders utilities to shed load across entire service territories to prevent a cascading collapse that would destroy transformers and substations and take weeks or months to repair. When that happens, the power does not come back in a few hours. It comes back when the grid operator determines that sufficient generation is available to restore load without re-triggering the failure. During Winter Storm Uri, some Texas households were without power for 4 to 5 days. During the 2003 Northeast blackout, 55 million people lost power and some areas were dark for 2 days. During Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, the average household was without power for 84 days. And what happens inside your house during a sustained summer outage is medically dangerous within hours. The interior temperature of an unventilated home in 107-degree heat reaches 95 degrees within 2 hours and exceeds 100 degrees within 4 hours. The CDC has documented that heat-related deaths begin occurring at sustained indoor temperatures above 95 degrees, particularly among adults over 65, people with cardiovascular conditions, people on medications that impair thermoregulation, and young children. Food in your refrigerator begins spoiling within 4 hours without power. Food in your freezer lasts approximately 24 to 48 hours if the door remains closed. After 48 hours, your entire freezer inventory must be discarded. For a household that keeps $200 to $400 worth of frozen food, that is an immediate financial loss on top of the health risk. If you depend on a well for water, you have no water when the power is out, because your well pump is electric. No water for drinking, for cooking, for bathing, for flushing toilets. If you depend on an electric medical device, a CPAP machine, a home oxygen concentrator, a powered wheelchair charger, a nebulizer, a home dialysis machine, you are facing a medical emergency within hours of losing power. And if you have a generator, you have air conditioning in at least one room, you have refrigeration, you have water, if you are on a well, you have the ability to charge medical devices, and you have light. The difference between a household with a generator and a household without one during a 72-hour summer blackout is not a matter of comfort. It is a matter of survival for anyone over 65, anyone with a chronic condition, and anyone with young children. And the generators that are available today at hardware stores and online retailers will not be available after the first major blackout of the summer, because the demand surge that follows every blackout event strips inventory within 24 to 48 hours. The time to buy a generator is before you need it, not during the crisis when every other household in your county is trying to buy one at the same time. A portable 3,500 to 7,500-watt dual-fuel generator costs between $400 and $1,200, depending on the brand and capacity. It will run a refrigerator, a window air conditioning unit, lights, phone chargers, and a well pump simultaneously for 8 to 12 hours on a single tank of fuel. A 5-gallon gas can costs $15. 20 gallons of gasoline, enough for approximately 36 to 48 hours of generator runtime, costs approximately $80 at current pump prices. The total cost of a generator setup with fuel is approximately $500 to $1,300. The cost of not having one in the middle of a 72-hour blackout in July is measured in spoiled food, dangerous indoor temperatures, medical emergencies, and the kind of helplessness that no American should have to experience in a country that generates more electricity than any nation on Earth except China. Buy the generator. Buy it now. Buy it before the summer heat arrives and before the first blackout strips every shelf in every hardware store within 100 miles of the affected area. Because the grid that is supposed to keep your lights on has been weakened by 40 years of underinvestment, destabilized by a war that disrupted the fuel it runs on, overwhelmed by data centers that did not exist a decade ago, and hollowed out by the retirement of the reliable power plants that carried this country through every summer since the invention of air conditioning. And NERC, the agency whose job it is to tell you whether the grid will hold, has spent 4 consecutive years telling you it might not. This is the year to listen. Because the 4-minute margin that saved Texas in 2021 does not exist anymore. The 3,600 megawatts of delayed coal retirements that saved MISO in 2023 are gone now. Those plants are closed. The backup plan has been retired. And the summer heat does not negotiate with policy timelines, does not wait for transmission upgrades, and does not care that the replacement infrastructure is 3 years behind schedule. Buy the generator. Buy it today.